This is Rabbanit Leah Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. This week's episode comes to you in 4 parts. First, we'll have a discussion about the 3 weeks, which will begin this Sunday. It's a period of mourning leading up to Tish'a B'Av. Second, we'll be talking about the Parshat Balak. Third, we have a halacha segment about the usage of umbrellas on Shabbat. And fourth, we'll have an interview with our vice president for the House, Daniel Shayat. So we're coming up on the fast day of Shivas Arba Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. This year celebrated on the 18th of Tammuz because of Shabbat. And that opens up this period of the 3 weeks in which we start to get into mourning for the first and second temples. And it's kind of a hard time to relate to because that was a long time ago, because we now have a state of Israel. How should we be thinking about this period of the calendar?
I think you are absolutely correct. It is hard, and that's exactly what this season is about. Because it's hard, we need a season to cultivate that sense of mourning for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple, and all that its absence symbolizes and signifies. Rav Soloveitchik spoke many times over many years and wrote about a number of locations the comparison between the mourning, God forbid, for a close relative, where the mourning practices are most acute immediately following the death, and then over the course of weeks and months and etc., we are rehabilitated and reacclimated into normal social interactions. When it comes to mourning something that happened centuries ago, we need a season to get into that sad, mournful mood and to really contemplate what it means to live in a world without a Beit HaMikdash, where so many of the mitzvot of the Torah are inaccessible to us, where we're taught that the absence of the Beit HaMikdash symbolizes more than it signifies, actually, the estrangement between God and humanity, and which I think also symbolizes our estrangement as human beings from one another. And so there's a lot to mourn, but it's not something that comes quickly and easily and naturally. We need a time of the year, a season, to make that possible. And just something else about seasons. I think you can divide, among Jewish people who take Judaism somewhat seriously, like I'm sort of beyond people who are like classically observant. People who take Judaism seriously, there are those who take it seriously enough that they really live according to the Jewish calendar, right? The holiday season is like a season for us and people similar to us, right? And the whole course of the year has a real narrative arc of holiday season and the 3 weeks leading up to Tish'a B'Av, right? These times of the year feel really differently, and of course the course of the week as well, Shabbat and weekday. There's a rhythm to the week for those who live according to a Jewish calendar. And
it's funny that the calendar is meant to kind of determine our emotions. There's something almost difficult or foreign about that, right? Like, oh, this day of the week I'm supposed to feel this way. And yet the answer to that is kind of yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I'm making a somewhat different point. That's true, right? I mean, there are also mitzvot that interact with our emotional life, and that is true. I think that's also true that if you live according to a calendar, then you feel that. I mean, that's true. I think for people aren't Jewish. There's like the start of the school year, and there's like the summer, and right these the quote unquote holiday season, right? These times of the year feel differently. Weekends are different than weekdays for everyone, right? Yeah. And there's even there have been studies that have looked at people who are unemployed for extended periods of time. They actually are happier on the weekend than they are on the week Thursday, right? Because, part of it's because all their friends go back to work on Monday, right? And they're so there's there's a contour to time is not undifferentiated. Okay, Judith Shulevitz writes about this in a really interesting way in her book about the Sabbath from a sort of broader perspective. But certainly true for observant Jews. We live according to the calendar. So the summer leading up to Tish'a B'Av feels really differently, and then after Tish'a B'Av, it's a whole different feeling to the summer. I think for Jews even those who take Judaism seriously, but a little bit, but not as seriously enough that they live according to the Jewish calendar, they have replaced it with the Jewish life cycle. So there are people who will seek out a rabbi or a synagogue for the birth of a child, for a bar mitzvah, for a wedding, for a funeral, but they're not otherwise living according to the Jewish calendar. They've replaced it with a Jewish lifestyle. I think that's a really
life cycle.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting a replacement, and I think they're missing something. I think the calendar really does shape life. So this time of year, as we go into the 3 weeks from the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, observed on the 18th of Tammuz, until the beginning of the month of Av, we Ashkenazi Jews refrain from occasions that would cause us to recite the Shechianu blessing. So we don't make major purchases like new cars, new homes, fancy clothing, expensive clothing, and we don't have weddings during this time of year, and people don't have haircuts, or many don't shave as well. Leading up to and sort of this growing mourning practices, expanding mourning practices that will become most severe of all on Tish'a B'Av itself.
There's something interesting also in that Rav Soloveitchik writes famously about how the 3 weeks match up to parts of the mourning periods that you observe after the death of a loved one. And it's kind of interesting how the Jewish calendar and the Jewish life cycle do kind of overlap or bring up the same sorts of things in different ways. But that, and I wonder whether people who have experienced that type of personal loss can then tap into those emotions to experience national loss, and that actually maybe it's a time to kind of tap into what was that emotional experience like when I lost my parent, sibling, and to kind of realize that those emotions help us to feel more connected as a nation, the way that in some ways those emotions in our personal life cycle might have helped us feel more connected to our family.
That's interesting. Rav Nachum Rabinovich makes a counterpoint in one of his tshuvot in Siach Nachum. He says that the Talmudic understanding, ein chinuch la'avelut, we don't educate towards mourning, only applies to mourning the Beit HaMikdash, but not to loved ones. We not to relatives. We do hope that by the time our children become adults, there will be a Beit HaMikdash, and there won't be a need for them to be educated in mourning for its absence, whereas we expect our children to mourn their loved ones. That is part of being a human being. And so we do, there is chinuch for avelut for relatives, just not for the Beit HaMikdash. That's an interesting...
and you've been doing that chinuch shacharit every day. When you've been teaching
yes, that's right.
a sefer about Avelut.
That's right.
Because it is, meaning the rules of mourning. We often talk about how, it's so crazy you learn the rules of Nida in like a month before your marriage, but actually when you lose a loved one, you learn the rules of Avelut overnight.
Yeah.
And that unless people really learn those rules in advance, it can be very disorienting. And in some ways, I think you don't even maximize the potential of those rules unless you know them before a loved one passes away.
Absolutely, and I think that's also just means that parents, when thinking about like what experiences to bring their children, like it's appropriate to bring a child, obviously knowing the child and the age of the child and the relationship to the loved one, but to a funeral, I think it can be appropriate to bring a child to a funeral. It's certainly appropriate to bring a child to a shiva visit, and it's appropriate to be standing with your child when Mourner's Kaddish is said in shul, and if you're saying it or you're not saying it, but like your child should know
why is it said,
what's happening, and why it's important to preserve decorum, even for these final moments of shul when people just a few rows around you are saying Kaddish. Like it is something we avoid thinking about, but we do hope that our children will one day say Kaddish for us. We need to model saying it and listening to others say it when we're in shul together with our children.
But the other thing, just to go back to the discussion about this time period, mourning for the temple, one of the things that I think that this time period helps us is that we often go through life without really thinking about how hard it is to be Jewish and the effects of anti-Semitism on our lives. And even when we, go places and think like, do I want to wear a yarmulke or do I want to wear a baseball cap here? And that really, I think Jews who wear yarmulkes normally, that is something they think about not infrequently. Am I comfortable wearing my yarmulke here? I'm publicly identified as a Jew. Does that feel safe to me? But we don't take the time to kind of step back and say like, it's crazy that we have to have that calculation all the time. Like, it is crazy that it's dangerous in this world to be Jewish. It is crazy that I'm always worried about what it will mean to be on the street publicly identified as a Jew. And on Tish'a B'Av, I think we really can step back, and Eicha opens up those questions for us of, God, what does it mean that we're your chosen people, and yet it's dangerous to be Jewish? Our synagogues are under attack. And I think to say, like, it's healthy not to ask those questions all year round, but it's also healthy to, yes, have a place for them and to have a moment when we articulate them, and that's very, like, psychologically healthy to give kind of an opening to that sort of speech and wondering and theological questioning and even anger. There's a song that they teach kids in Israel, little kids in Israel, when they live in areas that are rocketed frequently, like in Sderot. There's a song that they teach little kids. You can watch videos of it on YouTube. It is like really crazy, but it helps the kids articulate like where they feel fear in their bodies.
Wow.
And they have to say it out loud. Like, this is really scary to me. I feel fear in my head, in my torso, in my whatever.
Wow.
And because there's something very, very psychologically healthy about speaking about it.
Wow.
And I wonder whether like this like deep Jewish trauma, and you know, like that trauma is not just in our heads, it's like in our epigenetics, this like inherited, you know, for the Ashkenazi community, Holocaust trauma, but for the Sephardic and Edot Mizrach communities, like that trauma is just as present. It's just, you know, it doesn't have the name Holocaust to go on it. It's just different kinds of trauma.
Right.
But, you know, your family that was incredibly wealthy in Baghdad and then got kicked out, like that is equivalently kind of traumatic. And we carry those traumas with us, and we don't speak about. That's not, you know, it's not every week we give drushes about that trauma. And then this time of year is where we're really encouraged, like, explore that trauma, tap into it, try and understand it, try and actually really bring it to the fore of your emotional life, so that the rest of the year you don't have to do that, maybe.
Yeah. So this week's parasha is Parashat Balak, and it's an unusual parasha because the action shifts away from the children of Israel making our way through the desert to non-Jews, and their interactions sort of on the periphery of the story. It's like I don't know if this were like a movie, like the scene would end and all of a sudden cut to the king Balak trying to hire Bilam, a local prophet for hire, to curse the Jewish people, and his plan goes awry, okay? Bilam does not curse, but he blesses in very poignant, powerful, beautiful poetry that is even incorporated into our tefillah and really into our self-identity, actually, as Jews. So often echoes Bilam's blessings. And Bilam, therefore, is a really interesting character. He is capable of like beautiful language and prophetic language even. He seems to be a real prophet.
We've even adopted some of his language into our daily
tefillah.
Exactly.
Right. And yet he comes to a violent end. The Torah tells us, and Chazal, the rabbis, see him in very, very negative terms, and they go through the entire story reading very, very closely, finding real things, real elements of the story, but all with a very, very negative valence, portraying him as a particularly sinister and wicked individual. That seems to be one way that Chazal, the rabbis, read the Torah. The characters they liked, they really, really liked, and the characters they didn't, they really, really didn't like. And all of the sins that are kind of thrown in his head, you see this with Yaakov and Esav, where Yaakov, in the eyes of the rabbis, is an exceedingly pious and righteous person, and Esav is an exceedingly wicked person, guilty of every sin imaginable.
And the wicked people come to represent these other nations that have oppressed the Jews throughout the ages.
Correct. Yes, they're sort of typologies. I think Bilam was understood almost as a Jesus figure, actually, like a non-Jew who
caused a lot of suffering,
but was wicked. Right, was prophetic but wicked. Could do miracles, but ultimately was a negative, seen in a very negative light, and that's an interesting lens on which Bilam was read. The truth is, though, if you read the Torah carefully, he's not such a good figure. He initially rejects the offer when, I want you to curse the Jews. Says no, but then they come back the next day with more money, and he says, well, let me ask God again. So, like, that's not a nice thing to do. You don't ask God again because they offer you
more money.
Because there's more money involved, and God lets him go, but it seems kind of grudgingly. God says, you want to go, you're going to go, okay? Like, I'm not going to stop you from doing this thing that you clearly want to do. Which is
kind of funny, actually.
Well, it's generally how God operates in our lives. We really want to do something, God usually doesn't stand in the way, even if it's a negative thing.
Right. I mean, God might say, like, that's prohibited.
Okay, but fine.
But right, if I want to eat a cheeseburger, there's not going to, like...
Correct. But here, though, there is an intervention. God does stage an intervention. There's an angelic figure who stops Bilam's donkey from traveling, and the donkey seems to have more... perception initially than Bilam.
Right, and that's definitely meant to be in some ways humorous, but I really love animals, and so I've always really loved this donkey that has like kind of prophetic capabilities,
Yeah, and then turns to him and says, "Listen, what do you like? I'm your faithful donkey. Like, what are you like?
Yes.
What am I like? Clearly, if I'm stopped, it's for a reason. Like, what are you hitting me for?"
I kind of wonder since Shrek came out whether those scenes have been like forever kind of changed for people.
That's interesting. Well, right. I wonder. Okay, you're not wondering whether Shrek was inspired, but the movie was inspired by, or the book.
I mean,
was
it may
inspired
well have
by,
been, but actually, whether like the donkey in this week's Parsha now like speaks in the accent of Shrek's donkey
okay,
forever, right?
Interesting. That could be a question for our listeners.
Our listeners,
to
yes.
respond to. So we were sort of captivated by Rashi, which I thought we would share. This angel who is blocking the way of the donkey is described. So it says, so God is angry that Bilam actually gets up and goes. It gets up early in the morning, actually, sort of echoing
Abraham
and like a negative valence, right? So there's an angel is placed there to prevent l'satenlo, to be an obstacle, to kind of stop him from going. And Rashi says this angel who is l'satenlo, who is to be an obstacle, to adversary to Bilam on his mission. Rashi is the Malach Sharachim Haya. It was an angel of mercy. V'haya rotzeh limano milachto shelo yechta v'yovad. Rashi tells us this angel of mercy was to stop Bilam from doing this bad thing, that he shouldn't sin and then be lost and perish as an account of this grievous sin that he was about to do. And so that was very evocative for us. Do you want to,
yeah, so I feel that often we have these goals, and when things get in our way, we don't appreciate them. We don't appreciate, traffic. We don't appreciate complications. I'm definitely a planner, and I like it when my plans are executed flawlessly, and I get even angry when they aren't. And I think imagining that roadblocks can actually be caused by a malach shel rachamim, by an angel of mercy, really helps to kind of think about those roadblocks that come up in our lives, and to say, look, was this actually, was this failure or was this complication potentially even sent by God? Was it maybe even a blessing to cause me to have another minute to think about, am I doing the right thing? And not to say every roadblock is for the best, or, sometimes roadblocks really can be, bad. But to see it as at least a potential opportunity for reflection, and as even a message from God, a merciful message from God that's going to give us an extra moment to reflect and think about our plans and whether we're actually doing the right thing.
Good. And also, not just when we experience the roadblocks, it also teaches us what the role we can play in the lives of other people. This is a point that I saw expressed by Daniel Lifshitz, that in our intention and our really calling to be a source of rachamim to other people, that sometimes means helping them achieve their goals, and sometimes it means intervening and trying to stop them from achieving their goals. That also might be the most merciful thing we can do for another person. And I think that also is a really valuable lesson to kind of take with us. Like, I want to be a source of rachamim to the world around me, to the other people in my life, and that doesn't always mean encouraging and helping. Sometimes it means
foiling.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we're recording this episode, it's been raining a lot in Chicago, and rain on days when you can drive. Okay, so you can get around and not get so wet. But what about on Shabbat when you're walking? Rain can be really annoying.
Yeah, so we have raincoats and ponchos to help us stay dry. And I think boot wearing is also a nice way to keep our feet dry. I actually think it's so great when people wear big ugly boots on Shabbat in our shul, because to me that is a sign of I walked here even though it's raining, and even though I live a little bit far, and even though weather's not good, I observe Shabbat and I come to shul even in bad weather, and here I am in my boots. So I be proud of your boots on Shabbat. You could also carry nice shoes and change when you get here if that's your thing. But boots are great. Umbrellas, though, are really controversial in halacha, and seeing as we've been using them on these weekdays, and seeing as we do see umbrellas sometimes in our shul on Shabbat, I wanted to take this opportunity to share some information about umbrellas on Shabbat. Sure.
So the Noda B'Yehuda in the 1700s in Prague wrote that it's prohibited to use an umbrella, and the basic reasoning is that you can't make a tent on Shabbat. So meaning if you go camping on Shabbat, you have to build your tent before Shabbos starts. And that actually makes sense in like a deep way connected to where we learn what milacha, what prohibited Shabbat activity is, comes from the activities used to build the Mishkan. The Mishkan was ultimately kind of a tent.
Yeah.
And so to say that making a tent is prohibited seems like deeply in line with where we learn all Shabbat prohibitions from. And so the Noda B'Yehuda felt that, right, that putting up an umbrella or even taking an umbrella that's already open and just putting it over your head where it protects you from the sun or the rain is a Shabbat violation.
Yeah, and yet, sometime later, I guess maybe a generation or two later, in Pressburg, Sam Sofer, or Moshe Sofer, he analyzed this topic, and he felt that umbrellas were fundamentally permitted, and he compared them to the operation of any type of device which is meant to open and close as part of its regular use, right? You would never say that closing a door is building a wall. So too, opening an umbrella isn't erecting a tent. You're operating an umbrella, you're operating a door. I tell my children, doors are tools, not toys. But you're not building a wall when you close a door. You're not building a chair when you open a folding chair. Opening and closing a folding chair, opening and closing a folding table is not constructing. It's operating a device designed to be operated in this way, and Sam Sofer felt that umbrellas could be permitted. Nonetheless, in the centuries since he wrote those words, an overwhelming consensus of scholars who have studied the topic, and maybe more importantly,
Jews
the
who
community
live the
of
topic.
the community of the committed, like Shomer Shabbos Jews all over the world in 4 continents, 5 continents, I don't know, 6 continents have not used umbrellas on Shabbat. And the position of Noda B'Yehuda, the restricted position of Noda B'Yehuda, really has won out. And that's one of the ways that we inconvenience ourselves on Shabbat. We walk when it would be more convenient to drive, and we get a little bit damp in our raincoats when it might be more convenient to use an umbrella. So when I see somebody with a wet umbrella in Shul on Shabbat, I have the internal dialogue that I have in my mind is, on the one hand, how can I say it's forbidden when someone as great as Chassam Sofer, one of the greatest halachic scholars of all time, has weighed in and said it's permissible? Who am I to say that it's forbidden? It's sort of a high standard of proof, I believe, to declare something forbidden. On the other hand, this is something that, in general, Sabbath observant Jews really don't do. I think it's certainly like poor optics for our community to see so many damp umbrellas in our shul. It's really not something that one expects to see in an Orthodox shul on Shabbat.
But it is, I mean, as we've already mentioned, a profoundly kind of complicated area of halakha. And there's things that you would think, well, if we don't use umbrellas, we also wouldn't do the following. So, for example, if your home had kind of an awning that you could pull out or retract, you might assume, well, especially if I'm using that awning to protect from rain or from sun, that would be prohibited on Shabbat. But it seems like the preponderance of the poskim, the halachic decisors, think that is actually permitted on Shabbat.
Because it's set up and it's there, and the canopy is already up on the frame before Shabbat begins.
And it's already maybe above your head or something like that before Shabbat begins. That might be another difference. And similar to that, actually, in a stroller, when you have kind of also a retractable awning, like a stroller cover that's attached and that you can open and close, that too seems like it's permitted to kind of use on Shabbat, even though it seems very similar to an umbrella.
Yeah, and the same people who reinforce and confirm the prohibition against umbrella use say that it's permissible to operate a stroller canopy. Chazon Ish in the early 20th century, who was from Lithuania and then moved to Israel. He felt that it was, having been established as a prohibition, we shouldn't tamper with that established practice
about
umbrellas, but he looked at strollers and said, yeah, operating a stroller canopy is really no different than opening and closing a door that's meant to be open and closed, or opening and closing a folding chair that's meant to be open and closed. A stroller canopy is meant to be open and closed, and that's not building anything new by opening the canopy to keep the baby out of the sun or out of the rain.
So these rules about constructing tents or building in general on Shabbat, they're actually extraordinarily complicated, and a great resource for Shabbat questions in general. I mean, you're always, of course, welcome to approach either one of us, and if we don't know the answer offhand, we will look it up and get back to you. But a great resource that really anyone can use is there's a great set of books called the 39 Melochos, Melochos. It's a 4-volume set written by Rabbi Ribiat, and they're fully in English. They're very carefully organized. The footnotes are fantastic. Really, endnotes, I guess. It's like a whole nother book of endnotes.
I have to correct you. It is it is not fully in English. The wonderful endnotes that you just praised
are fully in Hebrew.
Fully in Hebrew.
Right. But if you're looking for something that's accessible in English, I think the English here really is kind of pretty accessible. And but it does. As with all halacha books, it is worth looking at a variety of books because many of them, there's obviously a multiplicity of opinions. But this is a great resource and a great place to start.
I would say maybe less for practical guidance, where I feel that either Shmirat Shabbat Gehilchata or a more updated version, a book like Rav Melamed's Hilchot Shabbat book, is going to be a bit more user-friendly and a bit more comprehensive in terms of...
And just more readable.
Yeah, but any question that I have, I can more easily and readily find an answer in those compendium, whereas Rabbi Ribiat's book, what's so fun about it is it's a kind of conceptual format where he goes malacha by... In other words, it's not like Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata is like, these are the laws about being in the kitchen on Shabbat, and these are the laws about
toys on Shabbat,
right, dealing with your children. Right, it's sort of organized by how you live your life. Whereas Rabbi Ribiat's book is organized by each of the 39 melachot, and he starts with very basic conceptual definition. This is what is prohibited. Here's the definition of the malacha.
Here's how it connects to the Mishkan,
and here's how it connects to. And then here's some practical applications. So I don't think he's trying to be comprehensive. What he is doing very, very effectively is presenting the kind of conceptual parameters and contours of the malacha as those have been developed over the centuries, and gives you examples of permitted, forbidden, forbidden, forbidden for each contour of the malacha's definition. So it's really great for what is the malacha of boneh? What is the malacha of building on Shabbat, and what does it entail? It's a great overview of that. You might then still have to look elsewhere for practical guidance for a particular question that may occur in your life.
But if you know that something is, let's say, prohibited or permitted on Shabbat, but you're trying to understand deeply, which of the 39 categories of malacha does it attach to and why?
Yes.
This is, I think, the best resource for that, because you really expand. You might say, this is prohibited because of dash, it's threshing. This thing you do in your normal life. It's actually threshing. Well, why is that? I'm not threshing.
Yes.
So he'll explain how you get from threshing to this idea of something that's encased in something else, taking it out, and why that relates to your sponge, for example. I think I actually get a lot of people here ask a lot of conceptual Shabbat questions. I know this is prohibited. Can you explain why?
Yes.
And this book really is a strong recommend for those specific types of questions.
Yes. And the shul currently has a copy in the library on the main floor of the shul, across from the offices. Okay, we are interviewing our Vice President of House, Daniel. Well, why don't you tell us how to pronounce your last name?
Shayet.
Let's all try it. Shayet.
Shayet.
Rhymes
Daniel
with try it.
Yep. Wow. Much better than my high school basketball coach, who said a different four-letter word to... I didn't get in the games much, so yeah, it was just...
He didn't let you try it.
No.
Oh, that's too bad.
So tell us, how did you come to Anshe Shalom, and when, and what brought you here?
Yeah, so my sisters lived in Chicago for many years and had a lot of friends from Minneapolis that lived in Lakeview and other parts of Chicago. My wife and I, Mindy, we lived out in D.C. for a bunch of years after meeting at University of Maryland, so Chicago was on our radar a bit. And then what tipped the scales was my work brought me to Chicago. I work for a consulting firm that consults for nonprofit organizations, many Jewish organizations, and at the time we were working with many synagogues, and we had just secured a project to work with 12 or 13 different Chicago synagogues, surveying their membership, and Anshe Shalom was a congregation that had very high marks. Their members were very happy. And I was kind of like, and then I was able
Data-driven synagogue decision.
Yep, exactly. So it was We try to be data-driven in the Shiite house.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so do you bring that data-driven attitude towards the house of the synagogue?
I try to. I need to do it a bit more. We have some ideas. There's, you balance the line of transparency. Sometimes I'm not always so forward that I'm the House VP in fear of getting a rush of people coming at me saying, fix this, fix that. But now anyone listening to the podcast, come find me. And yes, we're trying to be smart around where we invest our house dollars and make sure we're being responsive to the community and also forward thinking where possible.
What do you think are the number, 1, 2, and 3 biggest house-related issues the Shul is facing right now?
We need to take care of the roof. So that's
two,
one.
and three.
Exactly.
Is the roof on fire?
No, the roof's not on fire, thankfully. There's just a couple of leaks here and there that like
Maybe
to show
the
themselves.
opposite of on fire.
Yep. So
if people do want to speak to you because there's water dripping on them in shul, or with any other ideas about the house or ideas about consulting or anything, where can they find you? At Anshe Shalom, on a Shabbat, during the week, where can you be found?
Yeah, so on Shabbat, I'm usually close to where all the action is happening. My 3.5-year-old likes to sit in shul, so I want to make sure he has a front row seat to Torah reading and other things that happen. During the week, we live a few blocks south of Wrigley and tend to work from home, but also get out to Sketchpad, which is a great place to work. One of our members at Anshe Shalom founded it, and it's a great place for co-working, networking with other Jewish folks and Jewish organizations.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Straw Hat. As always, we're incredibly grateful to our producer, Haley Leventhal. If you have positive feedback, feel free to shoot us an email, talk to us in person, send us a voice note. Any kind of communication is great. If you have negative feedback, you should send it to us via a talking donkey who speaks in Eddie Murphy's voice. That would be how we want to collect negative feedback this time around. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week.